The morning air at Fort Benning was thick with humidity, heavy enough that every breath felt like drawing in warm fog. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but already the sky glowed in streaks of red and gold, painting a backdrop for the disciplined chaos of the parade field. Soldiers lined up in formation, boots planted firmly, uniforms damp with sweat from the warm-up. The sharp smell of dirt and sweat mingled with the faint metallic tongue of weapons oil that still clung to their gear. This was the daily ritual, the grueling rhythm that broke recruits and molded them into soldiers. The colonel, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose presence seemed to carry the weight of every war he had fought, paced the line with a hawk's gaze. His voice, when it barked orders, carried across the entire field, slicing through the morning air like a whip. To him, every stumble was weakness, every hesitation an opening to harden them further. And then it happened. She stepped forward, not confidently, but not meekly either. Her movements were deliberate, as though she had weighed every ounce of courage before lifting her boot off the gravel. She stood at attention, her chin slightly lifted, her eyes forward, and when she spoke, her voice was steady but low. "Permission to sit out, sir?" The colonel stopped mid-step. For a moment, his face was unreadable, frozen in a mix of disbelief and irritation. Then it came, a booming laugh that startled even the crows resting on the power lines. "Sit out?" he repeated, dragging the words as if they were a joke too ridiculous to believe. His laugh echoed, rough and mocking, and the soldiers nearest to him chuckled nervously, not daring to resist his mood. Her face didn't flinch. She didn't look down at her boots or shrink under his laughter. She just stood there, still as a statue, the request lingering in the air like smoke. The colonel shook his head, running a hand across his stubbled jaw. "Not in my army," he said sharply, his tone snapping back into command. "You think you can just ask out of training because you're tired? Because it's hard? You want to sit and sip water while the rest of my soldiers push themselves to the limit?" He stepped closer, his boots crunching in the gravel, until he was only a breath away. His towering frame cast a shadow over her smaller one, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to see inside her mind. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She only stood there with that same steady expression, though her fingers, hidden in her clenched fists, trembled ever so slightly. The colonel turned to the formation, throwing his arms out dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold. We've got a soldier who wants a break from pain. Maybe we should all take it easy, huh? Maybe we should cancel PT and have breakfast early. What do you think?" A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the ranks. Some smirked, grateful it wasn't them under fire. Others stayed silent, eyes darting between the colonel and the woman who stood at attention, unmoving. But she wasn't just another recruit. She had arrived quietly weeks earlier, barely speaking during introductions, never drawing attention to herself. Her presence was disciplined but distant, her focus sharp but detached. While others bonded over stories from home, shared family pictures, or bragged about high school sports and small-town glory, she remained an enigma. She listened more than she spoke. She drilled harder than most, but never sought recognition. The colonel had noticed her before. He noticed everyone. In his eyes, silence could mean weakness, or worse, arrogance. And now, her request to sit out was proof enough, or so he thought. "You will not sit out," the colonel growled, his laughter gone. "You will run, you will sweat, you will suffer like everyone else. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone calm, almost too calm for the situation. But inside, her chest tightened. The words, "sit out," had cost her more courage than the colonel could imagine. They weren't an excuse. They were a plea from someone who knew her body bore burdens unseen, scars hidden beneath fabric and silence. Every step she took on that field was already a victory, but no one knew. The colonel turned his back on her, barking the next drill. Drop down. Push-ups, count them out loud. The formation hit the ground, palms slapping gravel, voices rising in cadence. She lowered herself too, her arms steady, her posture flawless, her voice joining the chorus without hesitation. The colonel didn't look back, certain he had won, certain she had learned her lesson. But as she moved, sweat dripping down her brow, her mind wasn't on the colonel. It wasn't even on the soldiers beside her. It was elsewhere, in memories carved deep into her flesh. She remembered the heat of a desert sun, far harsher than this Georgia morning, the deafening roar of gunfire, the blinding flash of shrapnel. She remembered pulling her brothers in arms out of the dirt, while her own skin tore and burned. Her scars throbbed beneath her uniform, an invisible reminder of battles survived. And as she pushed through the drills, she realized the colonel's laughter didn't sting the way he intended. To her, it was only noise. He thought he had broken her. He hadn't even begun to understand her. By the time the drill ended, the colonel's boots were dusted with gravel, his voice raw from shouting. He scanned the formation, daring anyone to falter. His eyes landed on her again, and for a fleeting second, confusion flickered in his gaze. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. She was still standing. The barracks had a rhythm all their own. Boots thudding against concrete, the clatter of gear against metal bunks, muffled laughter, whispered curses when lights flickered out. For most recruits, the long nights were filled with chatter, trading stories of home, boasting about dreams of combat glory, and debating which MRE flavor was the least disgusting. She rarely joined in. While others sprawled across their bunks with letters from home, she sat at the edge of hers, lacing her boots with methodical precision. Her hands moved quickly, almost too quickly, as though tying and retying those laces was the only way to keep restless thoughts at bay. To her bunkmates, she was a mystery. She never spoke of where she came from. When asked, she gave short answers, Midwest or out west, vague directions that left no room for follow-up. She didn't keep pictures taped above her bed, no postcards, no keepsakes. The metal frame of her bunk was bare, a reflection of the silence she carried. At first, the other recruits tried to pry. Got a boyfriend back home? One asked with a teasing grin. She had simply shaken her head. Family write you letters? Another pressed. She had shrugged. It didn't take long before they stopped asking. But silence carries its own weight. When lights went out and whispers carried through the darkness, recruits swapped stories about her instead. She's too quiet, one murmured. Bet she doesn't even last until graduation. Another added, or maybe she's just hiding something. No one stays that closed off unless they've got a past. She heard them, every word. But she didn't correct them. She didn't defend herself. Let them wonder, she thought. It was easier than explaining. During training drills, her silence was different. It wasn't hesitation. She moved with precision, as though every command was etched into her muscle memory. She fired her rifle with deadly accuracy. She navigated obstacle courses like she'd done them 100 times before. If anything, she trained harder than the rest, not to prove herself, but because stopping meant remembering. The colonel noticed her again. He didn't like mysteries. To him, every soldier was a book, and a good commander learned to read his soldiers quickly. But this one, she was closed like a locked safe. No bravado, no excuses, no visible weakness. Except for that single moment on the parade field when she had asked to sit out. That had revealed something. Something he intended to pry open. Quiet ones break the hardest, he muttered once to his sergeant, watching her during rifle drills. When they finally snap, it's messy. But she didn't snap. She absorbed orders like stone absorbs rain, letting them soak in without complaint. Inside, however, she carried the battlefield with her. At night, when the barracks quieted and the hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sleep rarely came easy. Images returned uninvited, smoke rising over ruined streets, the metallic taste of blood in her mouth, the deafening boom of explosions. She could still feel the vibration of shrapnel tearing into her body, the screams of her unit as chaos swallowed them whole. Her scars ached in the stillness of night, pulling her back into moments she had fought to bury. But she had learned long ago not to show it. Pain, in the military, was currency. If others saw it, they spent it against you. So she masked it in silence. Silence became her armor. To the recruits around her, she was disciplined but strange. They bonded through shared complaints, through laughter over their aching muscles and bruised pride. She bonded with no one, preferring the steady rhythm of training to the fragile intimacy of conversation. It wasn't that she didn't want connection. It was that she feared what might spill out if she let her guard slip. The colonel, however, misread her silence. To him, it looked like detachment, maybe arrogance. He'd seen soldiers like that before, ones who thought they were above the system, who believed they didn't need the brotherhood of the unit. In his eyes, that was dangerous. Soldiers survived by leaning on each other. Lone wolves didn't last. So, he tested her. During a group march, he called her out to carry extra weight. During drills, he extended her reps beyond the others. He pushed her harder, waiting for her to crack. But every time, she did it, quietly, methodically, with no complaint. Her uniform soaked with sweat, her arms trembling from exhaustion, but her face unreadable. It frustrated him. It intrigued him. And it unnerved the recruits who watched. Some began to respect her. Others resented her, whispering behind her back that maybe she was trying to show them up. She didn't correct them either. To her, their opinions were just noise. But inside, she couldn't silence one truth. Every drill, every march, every night staring at the ceiling, she wondered how much longer she could keep the scars hidden. The colonel had already laughed once at her hesitation. What would he do when he finally saw the truth? And so she doubled down on silence. She hid behind it like a shield, never revealing too much, never letting them glimpse the battles she had already fought. What none of them understood, not her bunkmates, not even the colonel, was that her silence wasn't born of pride or arrogance. It was born of survival. She had already given so much of herself to war that words felt like luxuries. Silence, for her, was strength. Yet, like every shield, it could only hold for so long before something or someone forced it to shatter. And the colonel, whether he realized it or not, was already pressing against its cracks. The Georgia morning was already hot, the kind of sticky, suffocating heat that clung to uniforms like a second skin. Sweat rolled down faces, soaking into collars, dripping onto the gravel parade field where soldiers stood in formation. Boots shifted restlessly, the crunch of gravel betraying nerves. The colonel's shadow stretched long in the rising sun as he paced in front of the formation. His voice had already torn through the air that morning, barking orders, driving every man and woman to the edge of exhaustion. This was the Army's way. Strip them down, break them apart, then rebuild them into something stronger. He had seen hundreds of recruits buckle under pressure. Some cracked by complaining, others by collapsing. But the quiet soldier, the one who had dared to ask to sit out, had become a particular target for his scrutiny. He called her forward again. Front and center, he barked, his tone sharp as a blade. The recruits stiffened. A low murmur rippled through the ranks. Everyone remembered the last time she stood there, asking for what no soldier dared ask: a break. Some smirked, already imagining her stumbling. Others leaned forward slightly, their curiosity outweighing their fatigue. She stepped forward. Her boots were steady against the gravel, but inside, her chest tightened. Each step sent a dull ache through her body, the familiar pull of scar tissue beneath her uniform. She forced her breathing to steady, forced her face into calm neutrality. She stood at attention, eyes forward. The colonel eyed her with a mix of irritation and curiosity. He had seen her work. He had seen her silence. He had seen her endurance that didn't quite match her small frame. But still, he couldn't shake his suspicion. She wasn't like the others. And in the military, being different was rarely a strength in the eyes of command. "Fall in," he ordered. "You're not standing out here like a spectator. You're going to sweat with the rest of us." "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her voice calm. But her calmness only fueled him. To the colonel, calm in the face of his authority was either arrogance or hidden weakness. "Double time," he shouted, motioning the platoon into motion. The formation began to run, boots pounding in unison against the gravel. Dust rose with each step, clinging to their uniforms, mixing with sweat. The rhythm of their voices rose in cadence calls, chanting words drilled into them since day one. She ran too, her breaths sharp and even. But each inhale carried more than air. It carried memory. The sound of boots slamming into gravel echoed like gunfire in her head. The chants blurred into the pounding of artillery, the rhythmic beat of marching into the chaotic thunder of explosions. Her body remembered what her mind tried to bury. Shrapnel, fire, smoke. The world tilted. For a moment, the field blurred, replaced by the valley half a world away where she had been torn apart. Her lungs seized, not from the run, but from the phantom dust of a battlefield she had never truly left. She forced herself back, dragging air into her chest, focusing on the sound of her boots, the burn in her thighs, the beat of her heart. This wasn't the valley. This was Fort Benning. These were recruits, not enemies. This was training, not war. But her body didn't care. It remembered pain as if it had happened yesterday. "Pick up the pace." The colonel barked, his voice slicing through her fog. He jogged along the side of the formation, scanning faces, looking for weakness. His eyes landed on hers again. And in that second, her hesitation gave her away. Her stride faltered, not enough for the others to notice, but enough for him. The colonel's instincts were sharp. He could spot doubt like blood in the water. "What's the matter, soldier?" he barked, his tone mocking. "Too hard? Too tired already? Or do you want to sit out again?" The recruits around her chuckled nervously, some stealing glances at her as they ran. The colonel's words were a test, a jab meant to break her composure. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing. Silence. Always silence. But the colonel didn't accept silence as an answer. He pressed harder, his voice booming over the formation. "Speak up, soldier. Or is your excuse so weak you're afraid to share it?" Her breaths came faster now, her chest burning, but not just from the run. His words dug into the place she kept locked away, the truth she couldn't share. Not here, not like this. To speak of it would mean reopening wounds that never fully healed. Still, the pressure mounted. The colonel's voice carried, and the soldier's eyes on her burned hotter than the sun above. Her silence, once her shield, was now becoming her cage. She clenched her fists mid-run, her nails biting into her palms. She wanted to shout back, to tell him she had bled enough, that her body carried more pain than his drills could ever inflict. She wanted to scream that her scars weren't weakness, but proof of survival. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she ran harder. Her boots pounded faster against the gravel. Her lungs screamed, her muscles burned, but she refused to fall behind. The formation surged forward, and she surged with it, her silence louder than any excuse she could have given. The colonel's smirk faded slightly. He had expected her to crack, to stumble, to reveal herself as weak. Instead, she pushed harder, as if his words had fueled her. For the first time, he wondered if he had underestimated her. But his pride wouldn't let him admit it. Faster. He barked again. If she thinks she can outrun me, let's see all of you keep up with her. The recruits groaned as the pace quickened, sweat pouring, breaths ragged. Some cursed under their breath, but none dared fall out. She kept running, her silence now a defiance he hadn't anticipated. Every step was a reminder she wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. She wasn't here to prove herself to him. She was here because she had already survived worse. But still, inside her, the pressure built. Because silence could hold off questions, could shield her from stares, but it couldn't erase the truth. And she knew, deep down, that one day soon, her silence would no longer be enough. One day, they would all see the scars. And when that day came, no amount of laughter from the colonel would be able to mask the weight of what she carried. The sun was higher now, blazing down on the field with merciless heat. Dust clung to sweat-soaked uniforms, the smell of grit and effort hanging thick in the air. The recruits had run until their lungs burned, pushed through push-ups until their arms shook, and climbed obstacles until their palms were raw. The colonel, however, was unsatisfied. His eyes kept returning to her, the quiet soldier who never complained, never faltered, but never explained. And now, her silence irritated him more than ever. "Formation, halt!" he barked. Boots slammed against the gravel, the platoon freezing in place. Chests heaved, sweat dripped, and the soldier's eyes darted nervously between him and the woman standing near the center. "You," he said, pointing straight at her. "Step forward." She did. Her boots crunched on the gravel, her posture straight, her face unreadable. Inside, though, her stomach tightened. The pressure was building, too much laughter at her expense, too many eyes burning holes in her back, too many questions she couldn't answer without revealing everything. The colonel's voice was like a whip. "You think you can stay silent? You think your little act makes you stronger than the rest of them?" He gestured to the platoon. "These soldiers are breaking their backs, and all I see from you is defiance. No words, no explanations. Just silence. Well, silence doesn't earn you respect. It earns you suspicion." The recruits shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to seeing him single out one person this much. Some felt pity. Others bristled, remembering how she always kept to herself. The whispers began again, low but sharp, rippling through the ranks like static. Maybe she's hiding something. Maybe she doesn't belong here. Maybe the colonel's right. She's too quiet. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. She had heard whispers before, in the hospital, in rehabilitation, even in her hometown when she came back changed and scarred. People always whispered when they didn't understand. The colonel took a step closer, his boots heavy against the gravel. His voice dropped lower now, the edge sharper. "So tell me, soldier, what's your excuse today? Why are you different? Why should I believe you belong here?" Her heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to keep the shield in place. Silence had carried her this far, protected her from pity, from judgment, from the constant reminder of pain. But now, surrounded by a formation of eyes and a colonel who wouldn't let up, silence felt like suffocation. Her breaths came shorter, sharper. For weeks, she had swallowed the memories, the images of that night overseas, the feel of shrapnel tearing into her skin. She had buried it under layers of discipline, under the weight of her jacket, under silence. But the colonel's voice, his laughter, his accusations, They clawed at those layers, ripping them open. And suddenly, she couldn't hold it anymore. Her hands moved almost on their own. She reached for the zipper of her jacket. The sound was small, barely audible over the steady hum of the morning cicadas. But in the tense silence of the formation, it cut through like a gunshot. Every recruit's head turned. Even the colonel's expression flickered with surprise as the zipper slid downward. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, pulling the fabric apart. She shrugged the jacket off her shoulders. It slipped down her arms and dropped to the ground with a soft thud. The air stilled. Gasps broke out in the ranks. Some recruits clapped their hands over their mouths. Others froze, their eyes widening as if they were staring at something sacred or horrifying. Her arms and back told the story she had refused to speak. Jagged scars crisscrossed her skin, pale against the flush of heat and exertion. Some were thin lines, others thick and ragged, evidence of wounds that had nearly ripped her apart. They stretched across her shoulders, down her forearms, along the ridges of her back. Not training accidents, not childhood injuries. These were battlefield scars. The colonel's voice, for once, fell silent. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. His eyes, hardened by decades of service, softened for just a moment as he took in the sight before him. The formation stood frozen. The whispers stopped. All that remained was the sound of cicadas and the beating of hearts that seemed to echo louder than the colonel's voice ever had. She didn't explain. She didn't offer stories or excuses. She stood there in silence, her scars speaking louder than any words could. The colonel took a step back, his boots crunching against the gravel. For a man who prided himself on control, on always having the last word, the moment unsettled him. He had laughed at her once, mocked her hesitation, assumed weakness. Now, confronted with the evidence of battles he hadn't known she had fought, he felt his chest tighten with something he rarely allowed himself: regret. The recruits shifted again, but not out of disrespect, out of awe. The woman they had mocked for her quietness, for her mystery, was no longer just the silent one. She was something else entirely, proof that scars weren't weakness, but survival. For her, the silence felt different now. No longer armor, but release. For weeks, she had hidden, terrified of pity, of misunderstanding. But standing there, jacket at her feet, scars exposed to the world, she felt lighter. Vulnerable, yes, but stronger too. Her silence had shielded her. Now her scars spoke for her. And in that moment, with the colonel's laughter gone and the recruit's eyes wide with newfound respect, she knew something had shifted. The shield was gone. The truth was out. There would be no going back. This was her breaking point. But unlike what the colonel had expected, she hadn't broken down. She had broken free. The memory came back to her in fragments, like shards of broken glass. No matter how hard she tried to keep them buried, the colonel's laughter, the weight of the formation's eyes, the relentless drills, they had all clawed the past back to the surface. And now, as she stood on the field with her scars exposed, she couldn't stop her mind from dragging her back to the desert. It had been late evening when it happened. The sky had been painted in hues of deep orange and crimson, the desert sun bleeding into the horizon. Her unit was moving in silence, boots crunching against the packed earth, weapons at the ready. Dust clung to their gear, their throats dry from the heat and the long patrol. She had been in the middle of the formation, scanning the ridgelines, listening to the desert's uneasy quiet. She always hated that kind of silence. Too still, too perfect. In war, silence rarely meant safety. It meant something was waiting. The first blast tore the quiet apart. A deafening crack ripped through the air, followed by a bloom of dirt and smoke that sent the lead Humvee into flames. The shockwave knocked her to the ground, her helmet slamming against the packed earth. Ears ringing, she scrambled up, rifle clutched tight, heart hammering. Contact! Contact! Someone screamed. Gunfire erupted, sharp and relentless, bullets kicking up dirt all around them. Her unit scattered for cover, voices shouting, chaos rising. She could barely hear the orders over the thunder of machine guns and the scream of RPGs slicing the air. Her body reacted on instinct. Years of training fused with raw survival. She dropped behind a crumbling wall, rifle up, eyes scanning through the haze. Shadows moved along the ridgelines, enemy fighters, dozens of them, firing down with merciless precision. Then she saw it. 3 of her brothers in arms were pinned down near the wrecked Humvee, exposed and vulnerable. One was bleeding badly, clutching his leg. Another tried to drag him, but the gunfire was too heavy. They were trapped. Her gut twisted. She didn't think. She moved. Breaking cover, she sprinted across open ground, bullets snapping past her ears. Dirt exploded at her feet. The heat of the burning Humvee seared her face, the stench of smoke and fuel choking her lungs. She reached the first soldier, grabbed him by the vest, and dragged him toward cover. Her muscles screamed, but adrenaline drove her forward. "Move!" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. She hauled the second soldier up, his weight nearly pulling her down, but she refused to let go. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she dragged him too, forcing her body forward inch by inch. That's when the second blast hit. An IED, buried beneath the dirt, detonated only yards away. The world turned white, then red, then black. The blast picked her up and threw her to the ground like a ragdoll. Shrapnel tore through the air, hot and merciless, slicing into her arms, her back, her shoulders. She felt fire rip across her body, pain so raw it stole her breath. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The desert sky spun above her, the shouts of her unit fading into muffled echoes. Her vision blurred, her body numb. But then a hand. The soldier she had dragged clutched her arm, his eyes wide with terror. "Don't stop," he screamed. "Don't you stop now." And she didn't. With blood running down her arms, her uniform torn and burned, she forced herself back up. Every nerve screamed in agony, every step felt like fire, but she dragged the last of her men to cover. Bullets still rained down, but her focus narrowed to a single thought: keep them alive. She collapsed only after she had shoved them behind the safety of a crumbling wall. Her rifle slipped from her grip, her breaths ragged. She felt warm blood pooling beneath her, soaking into the desert dust. Voices shouted her name. Medics rushed forward, their hands pressing against wounds, their shouts echoing in her ears. The world tilted again, and she drifted into unconsciousness. When she woke, it was in a military hospital thousands of miles away. The sterile smell of antiseptic replaced the stench of smoke and blood. Her body was wrapped in bandages, machines beeping steadily beside her. Pain radiated through her with every breath, every twitch, every thought. Doctors told her the truth bluntly. Shrapnel had nearly killed her. Dozens of pieces had been pulled from her back and arms. Some wounds would never fully heal. The scars would never fade. "You should be grateful you're alive," one medic said gently. Grateful. She had survived, yes. But survival came with a price. Nights filled with nightmares. Days filled with pain. And the guilt, always the guilt. She had saved her brothers in arms, but not all of them. The faces of the ones who hadn't made it haunted her every time she closed her eyes. When she returned home, people looked at her differently. Some called her a hero. Others avoided her eyes, their gazes lingering too long on the faint scars peeking from beneath her sleeves. She hated both reactions. The scars weren't medals. They weren't badges of honor. They were reminders of pain, of survival, of the friends she couldn't bring home. She stayed quiet. Always quiet. Because if she spoke, if she told the truth, she feared she'd break apart. And now, standing on the training field at Fort Benning years later, her jacket on the ground, those scars were no longer hidden. The recruits stared at her in silence, their mocking whispers gone. The colonel's face, once twisted in skepticism and scorn, was frozen in something else entirely: recognition. He knew those scars. He had seen scars like them before. Not from training, not from weakness, only from war. And though she hadn't said a word, the truth rang louder than anything she could have shouted. She had already fought her battles. She had already bled for her country. And she had nothing left to prove. The silence stretched across the training field, heavy and unbroken. It wasn't the silence of discipline, nor the silence of fear. It was something far deeper, something none of the recruits had ever felt in formation before: reverence. Dust swirled in the morning heat, the sun glinting off helmets and rifles. Her jacket lay crumpled at her boots, a discarded shell that had once kept her secrets hidden. Now nothing separated her from the eyes of the platoon. Her scars were there for everyone to see, raw, jagged reminders of a war she had carried alone. The colonel's gaze lingered on her longer than anyone else's, his jaw clenched, his fists at his sides. For years, he had demanded respect through fear, barking commands until obedience became muscle memory. Yet in this moment, he realized something he had never admitted. True authority didn't always come from orders. Sometimes it came from truth. And her truth was written on her skin. A cough broke the silence. Then a voice, quiet but steady, from somewhere in the ranks. "She's one of us." It was Private Daniels, the youngest of the recruits, usually too nervous to speak without being called upon. His words hung in the air, fragile but firm. Then another voice followed. "No, she's more than that. She's already been through hell." Heads nodded, murmurs spreading not as whispers of doubt, but as affirmations of respect. For weeks they had speculated about her, why she never laughed, why she never shared stories, why she carried herself with a distance none of them could cross. Now the answer was burned into their minds. She hadn't been hiding weakness. She had been carrying weight. Weight none of them had the right to question. The colonel finally spoke, his voice low but steady. Formation. At ease. Boots shifted, hands loosened at their sides, but no one relaxed completely. Their eyes stayed locked on her, drawn as if her scars commanded gravity. She stood tall, unflinching, her chest rising and falling with calm control. Her silence was no longer mistaken for arrogance or indifference. It was now a language everyone understood, the language of someone who had already paid her dues. The colonel stepped forward, slow and deliberate. For a man known for breaking recruits down, his stride carried something unfamiliar: hesitation. When he stopped in front of her, their eyes met. Up close, the scars were clearer, the uneven ridges, the faded burn marks, the fragments of shrapnel that surgery hadn't been able to erase. He saw the cost written there, the price she had paid for every inch of survival. He opened his mouth, but for once, the right words refused to come. He had mocked her before, demanded answers, laughed at her silence. Now, all of that seemed hollow, irrelevant. In the end, he said the only thing that mattered. "Soldier, respect." The words weren't shouted. They weren't barked like an order. They were spoken softly, almost reluctantly, but with weight that carried across the entire field. Every recruit felt it. Respect wasn't requested. It wasn't forced. It was owed. Something shifted in the formation that day. The recruits who had once doubted her now stole glances filled with something different. Awe, admiration, even guilt. They remembered the times they had whispered, the times they had laughed behind her back. Those memories burned now, sour and heavy in their stomachs. Private Daniels, the same recruit who had spoken first, caught her eye. He didn't speak again, but his expression said everything. I get it now. I see you. For her part, she gave nothing back. No nod, no smile, no acknowledgement. She didn't need to. Her scars had said enough. Training continued, but something had changed. When the platoon ran laps, no one tried to outpace her anymore. Instead, they matched her stride, as though running with her carried weight of its own. During drills, when she climbed ropes or scaled walls, no one laughed or doubted. They watched. They learned. Her silence became their lesson. She never bragged, never explained, never demanded respect. She didn't need to. In a world where every soldier was still learning what it meant to sacrifice, she had already walked the path. She had already faced the fire. And they knew it. For the colonel, the shift cut even deeper. He found himself replaying the image of her scars, long after training ended. He had spent years hardening himself, teaching recruits to be tough, mocking weakness, driving fear into them so they would fight harder. But seeing her stand there, silent, unyielding, battle-marked, forced him to confront a truth he had buried. Strength wasn't in how loud you shouted. It wasn't in how much fear you commanded. Strength was survival, and she embodied it more than anyone he had ever trained. That realization gnawed at him. He thought of the times he had dismissed soldiers for breaking under pressure, the ones who hadn't fit his mold of toughness. He wondered now how many of them had carried battles he had never seen. For the first time in years, the colonel questioned himself. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the field emptied, she lingered alone, gathering her gear. The cicadas buzzed, the air cooling slightly as shadows stretched across the gravel. The colonel approached, his footsteps slower than usual. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him, just continued folding her jacket with practiced precision. When he finally stopped a few feet away, he cleared his throat. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said quietly, "but I owe you an apology." The words were stiff, foreign on his tongue. He wasn't used to admitting fault. But this time, he couldn't avoid it. She looked at him at last, her eyes steady, unreadable. He gestured vaguely at her scars. "I thought your silence was defiance. I thought you were hiding weakness. I was wrong." The evening wind caught her hair, the light catching the ridges of her scars as she finally slid the jacket back over her shoulders. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The colonel straightened, nodded once, and turned to leave. But the weight of what had passed between them lingered, unspoken but undeniable. Later that night, in the barracks, the recruits buzzed with whispers again. But this time, they weren't mocking. "She's a legend. I can't believe she went through all that and never said a word. Man, if I had scars like that, I'd never shut up. She just carries them." Private Daniels said nothing. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, remembering the look in her eyes when she stood in front of them all. He didn't see weakness. He didn't see mystery. He saw strength he hoped he'd one day have. And for her, lying in her own bunk, staring into the darkness, the silence felt different now. Not a cage, not a shield, but something else. Acceptance. For the first time since the desert, since the hospital, since the whispers and pity and distance, she didn't feel alone. The scars were still hers to carry, but she no longer carried them in silence. The platoon carried them with her now, not out of pity, but out of respect. And that changed everything. The next morning, the recruits gathered on the field, their bodies aching from yesterday's drills, but their minds still replaying the image of her scars. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. Everyone knew something was coming. The colonel had been too quiet, too thoughtful. For a man who barked orders like thunder, silence from him was more unsettling than rage. When he finally appeared, his presence cut through the morning haze like a blade. His uniform was pressed, his cap low over his eyes, but there was something in his stride, deliberate, purposeful, that made even the toughest recruits stand taller. He stopped at the center of the formation, his voice carrying with authority. "Today," he said, "we test what separates soldiers from survivors. Discipline, endurance, willpower." The recruits straightened, every eye fixed on him. The colonel's gaze shifted until it landed squarely on her. "And today," he continued, "you lead." Gasps rippled through the ranks. She didn't flinch. Her face betrayed nothing, though her pulse quickened. "Sir?" one recruit blurted, unable to contain himself. "Lead? What do you mean?" The colonel's eyes snapped to him. "I mean," he growled, "that this soldier," he jabbed a finger toward her, "will take point on the endurance gauntlet. She leads the formation through every obstacle. No excuses. No shortcuts. If she fails, you all fail." The words hit like a hammer. The endurance gauntlet was infamous. Hours of running, climbing, crawling, carrying, all under the brutal Georgia sun. Recruits often finished it broken, limping, bleeding, half-conscious. And now, their fate rested on her. The colonel knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't cruelty. It was acknowledgement. He had seen her scars, heard her silence, felt the weight of her survival. But scars didn't make leaders. Actions did. Today, he would see if she could command not just respect, but trust. They began at dawn. The platoon hit the dirt running, packs strapped tight, rifles in hand. She took the front, her boots pounding the earth in steady rhythm. Behind her, 30 recruits matched her pace, their breaths sharp in the morning air. The first obstacle loomed ahead, the wall climb. 10 feet high, slick with morning dew. She didn't hesitate. Slinging her rifle, she launched upward, fingers finding holds, muscles pulling her body skyward. The recruits watched, some expecting hesitation, but she moved with practiced efficiency. Her hand gripped the top, her legs swung over, and she dropped to the other side with controlled precision. "Move," she barked, her first word all day. The recruits surged forward, her tone cutting sharper than the colonel's ever had. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was steady, commanding, and they obeyed. Hours dragged on. They crawled through mud under barbed wire, the grit caking their faces and uniforms. They sprinted across uneven terrain, rifles bouncing against their packs. They carried wounded dummies over long stretches, the weight straining shoulders and spines. Through it all, she led. Her scars burned beneath her uniform. Old wounds screamed with every stretch, every pull, every push. Sweat stung her eyes, and her lungs fought against the unrelenting pace. But she didn't slow. When a recruit stumbled, she reached back, grabbed his vest, and pulled him forward. "On your feet," she snapped. "We don't stop." When another hesitated at the rope swing over the trench, she crossed first, boots slamming into the dirt on the far side. "Follow me," she called, her voice firm, unyielding. One by one they did. For the first time, the recruits weren't just following orders. They were following her. By midday, the sun was merciless. Shadows shrank, and heat shimmered off the ground in waves. Packs dug into aching shoulders, boots felt like lead, and throats begged for water. The recruits' faces were masks of exhaustion. Even she felt her body breaking. Pain radiated from her back, her arms, her ribs, echoes of shrapnel wounds that had never truly healed. Her vision blurred once, twice, and she stumbled, catching herself on her rifle. The easy choice would have been to fall back, let someone else take point. But then she remembered the desert, the screams, the faces of the men she had dragged through fire, the ones she hadn't saved. Failure wasn't an option. She straightened, grit her teeth, and pushed harder. "On me," she shouted, and the recruits rallied. The final trial was the hill climb, a brutal stretch of loose dirt and jagged rocks that tore at boots and palms. One by one, recruits faltered, falling to their knees. The colonel stood at the top, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She reached the base and paused, chest heaving. The hill loomed like a wall between her and the end. Her legs shook. Her scars screamed. But she set her jaw, planted her hands, and began to climb. Every inch was agony. Dirt slid under her boots. Rocks cut into her palms. Her breath came ragged, shallow, but she didn't stop. When one recruit behind her slipped, she reached back, grabbing his wrist and hauling him upward with sheer willpower. When another groaned that he couldn't go on, she barked, "You can. Move." Her voice carried strength not from volume, but from conviction. She wasn't telling them to climb. She was telling them she believed they could. And somehow they did. Together, gasping, bleeding, stumbling, they reached the summit. The colonel's shadow fell over them as they collapsed in the dirt, chests heaving, uniforms torn. She stood last, her body shaking but upright, eyes locked on his. She didn't salute. She didn't speak. She just stood, silent, scarred, unbroken. The colonel looked at her for a long time, his face carved with something between pride and humility. Finally, he nodded. "Formation," he barked, his voice carrying again. "Attention." The recruits struggled to their feet, wobbling but proud, their eyes flicking between the colonel and her. He let the silence hang for a beat. Then his voice thundered across the hilltop. "This soldier," he pointed to her, his tone sharp with respect, "is no longer just one of you. She is the example you follow. Not because of scars, not because of silence, because she led you when it mattered." The recruits straightened, their exhaustion forgotten, their eyes burning with something fierce, pride. For her, the words hit harder than any order, any command, any apology. She hadn't sought recognition. She hadn't asked to lead. But now, standing in front of the platoon she had carried through the gauntlet, she realized something. She was no longer the silent outsider. She was their leader. That night, when the barracks went quiet, Private Daniels whispered into the dark, he'd follow her anywhere. No one argued. And in the silence that followed, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, the silence didn't weigh her down. It lifted her. The morning sun rose pale and sharp over the parade field, casting long shadows across gravel and grass. The air smelled of sweat, dirt, and anticipation. Every recruit had been on edge since first light, boots polished, rifles aligned, faces set in disciplined attention. Today was different. They could feel it. Even the colonel's usual stormy presence was tempered, measured, deliberate. At the center of it all, she stood tall. Her scars, hidden beneath her uniform, no longer needed to be revealed. Everyone knew her story now. Every recruit carried it in their mind. The desert, the shrapnel, the fire, the endurance gauntlet. And yet, her expression was unreadable, calm as ever, almost serene. The colonel approached, his boots crunching against gravel, echoing across the parade field. For once, he did not bark. He did not mock. He did not shout commands. His gaze swept across the platoon, acknowledging their respect, then fell back on her. The recruits held their collective breath. "Soldier," he began, his voice steady, commanding attention without yelling. "You've endured what few could survive. You've led what many would have abandoned. You've demonstrated not just courage, but resilience, discipline, and leadership beyond your years." He paused, letting the words settle. "You asked nothing of me. You claimed no glory. And yet, here you stand, proving that leadership is earned, not demanded." The entire formation shifted slightly, sensing the weight of this moment. Even the junior recruits, the ones who had once whispered about her silence, now understood that this was history unfolding in real time. The colonel's eyes, hard as steel, softened in a way that surprised everyone. Not a softness of weakness, but of respect earned. He reached into his chest pocket and produced a folded flag, worn at the edges, a symbol of honor and sacrifice. He held it out toward her. "Take it," he said. "This is for you. Not for the scars, not for the silence. For the courage you've carried silently and the lives you've saved through your actions." Her fingers closed around the fabric, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the culmination of everything she had endured. It was more than a flag. It was acknowledgement, validation, a moment of reckoning where the world could finally see the weight she had carried. The colonel stepped back and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was measured, respectful, deliberate, a signal that transcended military protocol. A salute that said, "I see you. I honor you." For her, the world seemed to narrow down to that single moment. The wind shifted softly, rustling the folds of the flag in her hands. She returned the salute, precise, unwavering. Her fingers brushed the fabric, and she felt every memory, the desert, the hospital, the pain, the survival, bind together in that moment of acknowledgement. Around them, the recruits stirred. One by one, they lifted their hands in salute, boots straightening, eyes wide and shining. Some grinned through sweat-streaked faces. Others stood stiff, mouths slightly open, unable to put their emotions into words. The formation had transformed from a group of individuals into a living testament of respect and admiration. Private Daniels, who had first spoken her worth aloud weeks ago, felt a lump in his throat. He had watched her endure silently, seen her scars, followed her lead in the gauntlet. Now, seeing the colonel salute her, he understood fully. It wasn't just leadership. It was humanity. It was courage. It was everything he aspired to become. The colonel lowered his hand slowly, letting the salute linger in the minds of every soldier present. Then he spoke again, voice carrying across the field. "Let this be a lesson. True strength is quiet. True leadership is earned in fire, in sweat, and in silence. Today, we honor what cannot be fabricated. Courage lived, pain endured, and lives protected. Soldiers, remember this moment. Carry it forward." She lowered the flag, folding it with meticulous care, the weight of it symbolic of the weight she had carried for years. Her eyes swept across the platoon. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Silence had always been her ally, and now it was her language of triumph. The colonel stepped forward again, a rare, small smile breaking his usually stoic expression. "Dismissed," he said simply. The formation obeyed, boots scuffing against gravel as recruits relaxed, voices murmuring in disbelief, awe, and newfound respect. Some whispered her name. Others repeated fragments of her story to friends beside them, like a legend being passed down in real time. She stood there for a moment longer, absorbing the aftermath. The field, the sunlight, the faces of those who now respected her unconditionally. It felt surreal. She had spent years hiding behind silence, behind scars, behind the remnants of battles no one else could understand. Yet here, everything had shifted. Her chest rose and fell steadily, each breath lighter than the last. She knew her journey wasn't over. Scars didn't fade, pain didn't vanish entirely, and the memories would always linger. But for the first time, she felt seen. Not as a mystery, not as a burden, not as a soldier to be tested or judged, but as a human being whose endurance, courage, and leadership had changed the course of her world and the world of those who followed her. The colonel approached her one last time quietly. "You've earned this," he said softly. Not an order, not a critique, just acknowledgement. "And you've earned my respect." She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and turned toward the platoon. For the first time in months, maybe years, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. The recruits watched her with newfound reverence. They had seen her lead, they had seen her endure, and they had witnessed her ultimate triumph. The sun climbed higher, casting light over gravel and boots, over sweat and scars, over the human spirit laid bare for all to see. She lifted the flag, holding it close. It wasn't just a symbol of recognition. It was a symbol of survival, of resilience, and of the silent courage that had carried her through every battle, both in the desert and within herself. And in that moment, silence became victory. Not through words, not through excuses, not through recognition earned by others, but through action, through endurance, through the undeniable truth of a soldier who had faced fire, pain, and doubt, and had emerged unbroken. The colonel saluted once more, and she returned it, steady and unwavering. Around them, the platoon followed, a ripple of respect flowing outward, carrying the story of her courage like a living lesson. That day, every soldier learned something fundamental. Leadership is not always loud, courage is not always visible, and true strength is sometimes silent. And she, the quiet soldier who had once begged to sit out, had become legend,